Welcome everyone to the Happy Hour. I am your co-host, Jonah Paquette.
And I'm Supriya Gill.
And we are thrilled to have you join us today. As always, we are going to share tips and tricks from happiness experts from all around the world, all different fields here in the Happy Hour, devoted each and every episode to bringing you science-backed and research-backed skills for a happier and healthier life. Today, we are really excited to be joined by a wonderful guest, Dr. Chris Willard, who Supriya is going to tell you a little bit about right now.
Yeah, we were really, really excited to talk with him, and he was a great time. So Dr. Christopher Willard, PsyD, is a clinical psychologist, author, and consultant based in Massachusetts. He has spoken in over 30 countries and has presented at 2 TEDx events. He is the author of 20 books, including Alpha Breaths, Growing Up Mindful, and How We Grow Through What We Go Through. His thoughts on mental health have been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, mindful.org, CNN.com, and elsewhere. He teaches at Harvard Medical School.
I don't know about you, but I think just reading 20 books or even having just 20 books on your bookshelf seems exhausting, let alone writing 20 books. So I was very impressed with that alone. And of course, Chris, as listeners, you'll hear, has traveled all over the world to share his expertise with a really, really wide range of audiences. And yet incredibly down to earth, humble, kind person, as you'll see. And we got into some really interesting ground with Chris in this episode, didn't we, Supriya?
We did. And one of the things we also learned about are some upcoming books that he's working on to grow that list of
with
20.
Some fun titles, as you'll hear.
Yeah, it's pretty great. I really appreciated just hearing how he thinks and how he uses his knowledge to really break down these concepts that can be hard to understand or hard to practice into ways that we can put them into practice pretty easily.
Yeah, and especially for those of you listeners who have kids. I was going to say who are kids, but I don't know how many 8, 9, 10-year-olds are listening to the Happy Hour. Super, You never know. But how to take these concepts around mindfulness and present moment awareness, but really to put them into pretty digestible, practical terms for kids, I thought was really impressive as well. Because it's a topic that can, of course, seem a little bit out there, but he makes it seem quite simple, quite grounded, quite down to earth, and gets into some really practical and tangible ways that we can incorporate this into our lives, which is great. So you're in for a treat, obviously, with Dr. Chris Willard coming up right next here on the Happy Hour, and thrilled to have you here as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Welcome everyone to the Happy Hour. Our guest this week is Dr. Chris Willard. We are thrilled to have Chris with us today. Now, of course, with me as always, Dr. Supriya Gill, my co-host, my wonderful, incomparable co-host for the Happy Hour. And as we mentioned, though, we're pumped to have you. So, Chris, welcome to the show.
It is so great to be here, Jonah, and Supriya. It's wonderful to meet you. Jonah and I have kind of known each other online and in person, briefly at conferences and hanging out, being conference buddies for a few years. So this is really fun to reconnect.
Absolutely.
And
Likewise.
to connect.
I think conference buddies is a good way to put it. I like that term because that's kind of how it's felt. We had some mutuals. We sort of got to know each other, even shared a couple of meals at a couple of points. And then, I think last time around we were...
Exactly. And conferences are, I'm so insecure. I'm like, I gotta grab onto somebody for this 48 hours.
Weren't you guys supposed to be sitting next to each other at the book signing at the last conference as well?
Chris bailed on me for that.
That's right. I was supposed to meet you.
I forgot about Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
I was sitting there on my lonesome. But Chris, if I recall, we were kind of those troublemakers towards the back, hanging out, talking.
Oh yeah, totally.
Shooting spitballs at people at the conference. So it is great to have you on the show, though, my brother. Anyways, we have a lot of things that we want to cover in a short time today, so we're going to dive in shortly. But of course, for listeners, you already heard Chris's full bio, but Chris is one of the most prolific, I would say, psychologists, writers, speakers that I know. You've written 20 books, and we're going to get to talk about some of those. I did not stutter. 20 is correct. And you speak all over the world, which we're going to talk about as well, on themes like mindfulness and self-compassion and utilizing mindfulness-based approaches with kids. So lots of exciting ground that we're going to cover. But I'll also say, Chris, I will out you as somebody who's not only one of the most incredible sort of prolific writers and speakers and people that I know, you are also one of the kindest, most generous, kind of down to earth people. So you somehow managed to, I'll just say, I'm rambling here, but you somehow managed to be both super accomplished and super down to earth, good guy, normie, which I think is just so inspiring to see. So thank you for all of that, Chris.
That's the best compliment from Jonah.
I've always been that way, but I appreciate that.
The normie piece is the most important part, though.
That's like a huge compliment for me.
Totally.
Now, Chris, before we dive into your work, just for a little context, Supriya, listeners will know this, but Supriya always grants me, I love to ask wacky questions. And if it was up to me, I'd ask you like 50 questions just about, all kinds of random stuff. She gives me one. I'm allowed to have one rando question to start the podcast off. So I think actually for you and I share this travel itch where we have this insatiable desire to see the world. So what I would love to know is like maybe a quick two-parter, if I may. One, what is like maybe the place that jumps out to you that you have gone to either personally or professionally around the world that, is one of your favorite places that you've ever visited? And then secondly, what is a place that you've not yet gone that if you could go anywhere in the world, you would?
Oh, these are good. Yeah, and I know we try to hook each other up with some good travel stuff. Last fall I got to go to. I had a lot of time in the Middle East, which I've never really been to, in the Gulf, and spent 4 days working at a school in Egypt, and it just, just so different and yet so similar. Kind of working with the staff there and the students there, and I was just like, I cannot believe this is my life. Like, this is just really extraordinary. And then finding ways to share about mindfulness and self-regulation strategies kind of across cultures, and getting a sense of, what's happening in the culture there also. And just, and seeing what already makes sense there. And so that was just really fascinating, and had been totally on my bucket list. And then like it was like 3 weeks out, they invited me, and I was like, is this really happening? Like, what? And I was like, next thing I know, I'm on a plane to Cairo, and a 5-hour drive to Alexandria. And it was just really special, and really eye-opening on a number of levels. Just, we talk about how travel, blows up our stereotypes, and it really does. And I think I can go in with this, like, I have so much to teach these people. And it's like, oh, wow, I learned a lot, like, and really could do something about my own arrogance and cultural arrogance here. And that was certainly an experience in some other parts of the world, having that too. I think as, like a white dude traveling around, I think it can be easy to, adopt sort of a wrong mindset. But I think trying to be more open has just been amazing to learn.
Fantastic. And I had a chance not long after you to go to Egypt myself, but they didn't pay me to go. So I was doing it wrong. They didn't fly me out. So.
It sounded like a wonderful trip nonetheless.
Next time I'll have to do that. But yeah, talk about an otherworldly place, just completely counter. And then, last question before we dive in. I could give you a ticket anywhere in the world that you haven't gone. Where do you want to go?
I'm still itching. I still get that Kiwi itch. I really want to get to New Zealand at some point. So
they got some companies down there
these days. But it's far. It's a hard one with the family too. So
that is a long flight. How many places have you traveled to now? Yeah. How many countries? Let me narrow that.
So I have lost track of just countries, period. It's like 64 or something. And then for work, I think it's 31 for work. Wow. Where I've gone and given talks, which is, again, for me, just like, how is this my life? That means because I always love traveling. And then it was like, oh, maybe I get paid to travel. And it's like, this is absolutely bananas that I actually do get paid to travel. Not always like amazing, not American style, but it's like, but it's just so spectacular that I get to do that. And again, and teach and learn and just meet interesting people who are excited about interesting things and new ways of understanding the human psyche or spirituality or whatever, and just kind of cross-pollinating different ideas. So I'm like, this is.
And honestly, if they're just getting you out there, Chris, as I always remind myself when I get to go places for traveling, all the research says better to have money towards experiences as opposed to things. So if you're just getting out and being flown out, experiencing a new place, going, obviously if they want to throw a couple of zeros your way, no one's going to complain. But otherwise, just, paying your way, experiencing new parts of the world in this way is, how do you beat it?
Yeah, new perspectives.
Absolutely. Totally. And it's one of my favorite pieces of positive psych literature, which I know the two of you are kind of all about.
And so on that note, Jonah mentioned, and all of the work you do around mindfulness and some other things, but we're going to start with mindfulness. And can you just tell us a little bit about, Chris, about how you got into this and what mindfulness means to you?
I can. I mean, my story is kind of like, I often sort of start my talks with like, I never heard the word mindfulness when I was a kid, but I, had these experiences like, walking quietly in the woods at camp, or they'd say like, let's notice all the sounds around us. And, maybe the camp counselors were trying to get us kids to shut up. And now that I have kids, they probably were. Right. But it was actually these really powerful experiences. And then when I was in college, I had a lot of personal struggles with stress and substance abuse and kind of depression, anxiety, stuff like that, and took time off to find myself or get my shit together, depending on how you want to put that. And basically my parents ended up dragging me on a retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh. This was 1999 or so, and it was really transformative for me. I was happier. I've been sober since then. I got interested in psychotherapy. I got interested in spirituality. I got interested in positive psychology. Took some more time off just to explore more deeply, going on mindfulness oriented retreats, reading a lot, and finished school, was a therapist for was a teacher for a few years, and then a therapist, where I then spent a lot of time actually traveling, sort of spiritual seeking, and kind of, if I go this place, what will I learn in that place, and go on a retreat here and go on a retreat there. And that got me the travel bug, and also just that kind of seeking journey bug. And then it was amazing because I was in grad school in kind of the 2000s when mindfulness was, the research was starting to come out, the brain research and neuroplasticity was starting to come out, all this exciting stuff. And I happened to be working with kids. I was like, I want to try mindfulness with kids. Could this work? And just, I feel like I got really lucky with sort of riding the wave of like people really interested in this stuff at the time. And that's kind of how it got going for me. So I feel, again, like I sort of stumbled into this really at a lucky time where it was so transformative for me. And then finding ways to share that with others and bring it into my professional work. Just like, wow, this is amazing. Gratitude, positive psychology. Yeah, wow.
Love it. And Chris,
sort of
if you could,
started.
for listeners that obviously people come in with a whole range of exposure to this stuff, how would you even sort of put mindfulness into simple terms for listeners who aren't that exposed to it? It strikes me as one of those fascinating topics that you can write entire volumes of books on it, and yet it could also be whittled down to some few words. So how would you sort of operationalize or define that concept for listeners?
Yeah, I think, I think of it, in the clinical sense, sort of like the definition we sort of use is like paying attention to the here and now with acceptance and non-judgment. And that's really hard to do. Even paying attention is hard for us to do. Having acceptance and non-judgment is hard, being in the here and now. But I do think that's a useful clinical definition that can help us all agree on what that means and study it. And yet I also think when I talk in a more informal way, I think it's in some ways like knowing what we're doing as we're doing it. Like, do I know right now that I'm speaking with you two and hearing my voice and, feeling the vibrations and, watching you, nod along or fall asleep or whatever it is that we're doing. Right? So that we're, so really in the moment with it and with some intentionality there. And it can be a formal practice like meditation, or it can just be bringing that same kind of awareness to walking, eating, speaking, breathing, right? All of these things we do on a daily basis. So that's still not a pithy
that
definition,
was great.
I know.
And by the way, listeners, if you're only listening, know that neither Supriya nor myself were falling asleep, of course, with anything Chris was saying.
Very engaged.
It's like, it's very books. Like,
But I
define it.
love
It's a
what
very
you
hard thing
talked
to
about in terms
define.
of
So
both the sort of the formal and the informal, because I think that's something that trips people up is
yeah.
often, and we'll get into lots of interesting things to come. But I think people hear that word and they think, okay, I have to sit a certain way on a certain type of cushion with a certain type of chimes going on in the background for a certain period of time, as opposed to like maybe there's
Right.
ways to engage all of those autopilot activities in life in a little bit more of a present focused way. And I'm
Yeah.
always struck by, I think was it Dan Gilbert's work at Harvard that talked about like average person's mind is wandering roughly half
Yeah.
of our waking hours, like 47% of the time our mind is outside the here and now. And that is a huge amount of life.
Let's repeat that for our listeners who missed
47
what you said.
because their mind was half of the listeners were not paying attention there. But
I
yeah,
think they were
roughly,
asleep.
yeah, half of our waking hours. I'm always struck by that of just can we decrease that to 45%, 40%? I mean, we're always going to have mind wandering, it strikes me, but like, and some of that's actually very good. Maybe we'll get into that to have sort of, if we were present 24/7, that wouldn't be
Yeah.
great. But can we spend a little bit more time in the here and now? And I think that's kind of the promise of what you're describing there.
Yeah, when it's helpful to be in the moment, to be in the moment, when it's helpful to let our minds wander toward creativity, toward planning, toward remembering and reminiscing, to be able to do that. It's having a little bit more, I hesitate to say control, but a little bit more maybe influence over what our minds do and where they go. And I think that, as you two know, what brings us more
And along
happiness.
those lines, Chris, along with more happiness, what are the other benefits of being more intentional and being in the here and now?
I think what we see is we can see it at different levels. We can see it at the kind of I've talked sort of like the biopsychosocial, right? We see these physical changes in the body whenever we reduce stress, right? Immune system functioning goes up, digestive system, blah blah blah. Health gets better, basically fundamentally. We see psychological shifts, in terms of like more positive outlook, better mood, things like that. All kinds of psych benefits toward depression, anxiety, even helping with trauma, things like that. We see brain changes, the work of Sarah Lazar and other people seeing reduced amygdala activity. And I don't want to get too insider baseball, but that's like the big emotional alarm system part of the brain quiets down. And then the more planful parts of the brain, self-regulation parts of the brain, and actually perspective-taking parts of the brain activate, maybe even grow new gray matter. And so these are some of the real positive benefits that we start to see, as well as taking more perspective, being kinder, more compassionate in our relationships with others. So on all those levels, what we really see are benefits at the body, at the brain, at our interpersonal. And of course, that's not even saying anything about the spiritual level, where a lot of these practices have originated and can still be a big part of if you're a
So glad you
spiritual
mentioned
person
that,
too.
because that comes up often even in practice is, sometimes we don't ask those questions about how you're connecting spiritually or what this means to you in a different cultural context. So thank
Do you
you for
mean
mentioning that.
psychology as a field has a big
Right.
blind spot around religion and spiritual? I don't believe
What
what you're saying there.
what's a blind spot?
What? Also has none. We're perfect.
100%. And so, Chris, I'm curious because, so much of your work is with children, and I actually have a 4-year-old. So I'm curious about your thoughts about, and a 1-year-old, but I think she's too young. When do you think starting to teach mindfulness is appropriate, and how would a parent go about that, or a teacher?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if you're not teaching your 1-year-old, you're clearly, she's way behind. No. I mean, like my daughter just turned 5, and it's like, to me, it's little things like, can we do some fun, hot chocolate breathing, breathe in like you're smelling, blow out like you're cooling it off, kind of. Then we're teaching some breath regulation. Can we give kids little prompts and make things playful? I think a lot about Lev Vygotsky did this study where he was trying to get 8-year-olds to stand still. Now, I have an 8-year-old, so I know how this is going to end. But he says, stand still as long as you can. Of course, 5 minutes later, they're running around everywhere. So he calls them back in. He says, stand still as long as you can. And now imagine that you're like a knight guarding a castle. And actually, the kids now stand still for like 10
Wow.
or 15 minutes. So this is why, like when our camp counselor said, we want you to go in the woods and walk like an Indian. I think, we wouldn't and shouldn't say that anymore, but maybe like walk like a ninja or, something like that. That's walk as silently as possible. We're doing mindful walking because you're not thinking about the past or the future. You're just thinking about each footstep, the texture of the forest floor, right? Or imagine you're listening like a deer to all the sounds around you, like a deer that has really good hearing. That little bit of playfulness can really start to help our kids to tune in a different way, because play is really their language. My daughter actually, I was crying 2 hours ago. It was her graduation from preschool.
Congratulations.
Earlier it was a lot of work
Late
on my
nights,
part.
I'm sure.
But we were talking about the 100 languages of children or something in the graduation speech. I didn't quite catch it, honestly. But thinking about play as being really their language of how they learn, how they communicate. And so it's about making it playful. Can you breathe like you're smelling the hot chocolate and cooling it off? Can you walk like you're a ninja or someone walking quietly in the forest? Can you listen with the ears of a deer? All of these things are they're sort of like the training wheels, I think, developmentally, that then can come off, and you can just do a sound listening meditation when you're older, or you don't have to imagine you're holding a mug of hot chocolate to breathe in and blow out, cooling off. You can learn how to regulate your breath, and then you can learn how to watch your breath, right? But these images and the play is the training wheels in a sense. And I think that's how we can
I'm struck, Chris, by,
that.
you have such a creative side to you in terms of, I think a lot of people in mental health and who write aren't particularly creative in that way. And I think, I'm always struck by, I remember you're doing the pyramid breath when you were in Egypt, and sort of different, ways that you bring this to life, which kind of makes me think of like one of your most amazing books that's out there for a lot of people with kids is Alpha Breaths. And I'm wondering if you can maybe speak a little bit to that and just kind of what inspired you to write that book, and how that came about.
Oh my gosh, that was really fun. It was with my friend Dan Retschaffen, who's a wonderful therapist and mindfulness educator. So I was like reading to my son, must have been 2 or 3. We were reading I can't remember what it was, an Eric Carle book, sort of about like, moving your body and, banging your chest like a gorilla and stretching your neck like a giraffe, and sort of watching him do these movements. And then, sort of getting also sort of into like alphabet books at that age. And my friend Daniel, who had these really fun sort of breaths that I'd done a workshop with him once, and it was sort of like, there's the ballerina breath, and there's the hot chocolate breath, or the butterfly breath, breathe in and flap your wings and breathe out and flap them back out, or alligator breath, like you're opening and closing your jaws like an alligator. And so I reached out to him and I was like, how about like, we write this book together that's like, it's an alphabet book, but we're teaching breathing, and we have to come up with 26 just like ridiculous breathing practices. And so we got on the phone and kind of like wrote this book in like 25 minutes of like, B is butterfly breath, and C is chocolate breath, and D is like dolphin breath, and S is superhero breath, which is, one that he came up with. And, or actually a 5-year-old, I think, that he was working with came up with. And of course, every kid's book has to end with everyone falling asleep at the end. These are very important for parents. Y is like a mindful yawn, and Z is like a mindful. Nice long, So we had a blast writing that, and then we got emails from around the world that were really like enough that we then ended up writing a sequel last year, and my kid wrote a few, and so it's just been so much fun. That
I have
book
to
was a
say,
total blast
when
to
I think
write,
about
and
how
it's
I
in
spend 25 minutes, it's
Christmas
usually like
stuff.
watching a rerun of a show. You're writing an entire book in 25 minutes. I'm blown away, Chris.
Well, yes, and those endings are very much appreciated. So keep.
Yeah, like I had a 4-year-old at the time I was
very insightful.
That, so.
But I mean, I think this is so cool. And what you're speaking to already is how do you make this stick? And you described, play for the younger kids.
Right.
And what would you recommend if kids are a bit older? How would you make mindfulness stick for them?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think, eyes will roll as we get into teenage years. But I think it's meeting them where they are with, you know, I mean, my son's 8, so he still kind of goes for it sometimes, but it's like he's super into soccer. So knowing that like Leo Messi got really into mindfulness, I guess because he was so bored in the pandemic, he got interested in mindfulness, right? But that's like maybe
For
something
the
of an
American
in,
listeners,
or
Leo Messi is
different.
a soccer player, Chris, just to be clear.
I
Supriya?
actually needed that. I was like, okay, I need to look this Leo up.
He's only one of the greatest players of all
Soccer
time.
player.
I'm very well informed, okay?
Also, we have Simone
Yep.
Biles, Olympic athlete. We've got, all kinds of pop singers and hip hop artists interested in mindfulness. And LeBron, I know you're a basketball
I know
guy,
who
Jonah.
he is.
So these are, in sometimes, and things like, what do they love? I often say to teens, like, like listen to your favorite song, as a coping skill, but they'll come in and be like, oh, it didn't work. I still felt bad. I was like, well, okay, listen to your favorite song, listen to it mindfully. Like try listening to just one instrument for that whole 4 or 5 minutes of the song. And they'll come back and they'll say, Dr. Willard, my Spotify says I've listened to this song, Taylor Swift or whatever, 750 times. And I listened to just the drum beat and I noticed all these different things about the song I hadn't noticed before. And what that to me is also, which is a really key part of mindfulness that I think you're interested in particular, Jonah, is awe. Like part of what mindfulness does is it creates this sense of wonder. Like me, when I took a mindfulness-based stress reduction class and I ate the raisin, and took 45 minutes to eat a raisin, it blew my freaking mind, like all that was happening in that eating of a raisin. And it created a sense of awe, which maybe that's the operative aspect of mindfulness, right? Or we listen to music in this way and suddenly notice something new about the song that we never noticed before. Or we listen to music and notice how angry music makes our body feels, or sad music makes our body feels. And we're teaching emotional intelligence at the same time. And, like this is, anger feels like my heart pounding and sadness feels like a lump in my throat. And these are ways of inducing a little bit of an emotion that then we can work with in some ways and be more mindful of our bodies and more mindful of our emotions. So, those are ways to get some maybe buy-in from those, definitely more skeptical teens. I think with teens too, like teens in my office really love mindfulness as a therapist. A lot of parents struggle to teach their kids mindfulness, but it's like, if you're a parent, like don't try to teach it to your teenager. Like have the soccer coach do it, have a therapist do it, right? Someone else might be better developmentally at that age than you to try to teach this stuff. Yeah, and I just think that's important to remember.
I love what you said about that
Absolutely.
link with
Yeah.
awe and mindfulness, Chris, because I tend to think of them as somewhat sort of cousin states, so to speak, that they feed into each other. They're very related. And it strikes me that, part of the magic of awe, as I always tell people too, is not, to go off necessarily to the Grand Canyon or to go to Machu Picchu. If you can do those things, amazing. But like in reality, most of us can't just snap our fingers and do that. But there's actually so much magic that surrounds us each and every day that we miss. We have these blinders on, we lose sight of that. And the fact that we can, notice the wonder that, is actually in front of us each and every moment, oftentimes through that sense of awareness, through that, getting in touch with the beauty that surrounds. It's sort of Einstein's quote sums it up so well of there's two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle, and the other is as though everything is a miracle. And to really get in touch with those miracles that surround us every day seems to be, part of the magic of awe, but also, through that cultivation of present moment awareness that we can get there. So love that.
Yeah. It's fun, kind of, I always enjoy our conversations more casually off air too, because I feel like there is so much, even this question, people say, is mindfulness part of positive psychology or vice versa? And is gratitude mindfulness? Is this, it's like, it's just always sort of a fun question. Where does awe fit in? Where do these other, compassion, self-compassion, appreciation, how do these fit in with each other?
And even though we talk about them individually, there's, you can't help but it's like, you build one muscle and it inevitably is going to start building some of those other mental muscles as well.
They're all just fun cousins. That's all that's happening.
Yep. Yep.
That's right.
Big happy family, exactly. It's
Can't
my
have one without the
investment.
other.
Chris, you were mentioning
Yep,
teens
for
and
sure.
some of the challenges that can come up there, but also some of the opportunities as a clinician. I'm struck
Mhm.
that this is a particularly challenging time to be a teen in this current moment. Just if you look at rates of
Yeah.
depression and loneliness and isolation and bullying and the impact of social media use, and I'm just wondering for either the rare listener who might be a teen, of which I don't think there's going to be many, but perhaps more likely, parents of teens or someone who has a teen who they love and who sees some of these struggles. How do you feel like mindfulness may be of particular importance at this current moment we find ourselves when it comes to teens and mental health and stress and all the rest?
I mean, yeah, and just record rates of mental health issues, and it's not just in the U.S. I mean, I think for example, when I was in Egypt, what really struck me was it was those kids actually talking about very explicitly talking about mental health issues. Kids talking about kids in middle school in Egypt talking about panic attacks, and that's part of what I mean was
Mhm.
sort of walking with a lot of cultural stereotypes, a lack of openness, and I think some of that comes. I think one of the biggest challenges that we see is social media. And again, a lot of us feel this, but what was interesting being in Egypt was realizing that the kids there, social media had done wonders to break stigma around mental health. And yet it had also done unfortunate wonders to spread a lot of misinformation about mental health and how to treat it as well. So we have this big, kind of, uh, you know, it can really cut both ways. So how do we help our kids, sort of use social media, for example, in a way that's helpful and not harmful, to lead to actual connection
Mm.
rather than feelings of isolation? And I think that's an opportunity. It's a lost opportunity, or it's maybe not yet lost, but maybe we can recover and regain that. I think also what's become more and more clear, not just in the U.S., but as I talk to people in other places, is we're actually not going to therapist our way out of this problem. I don't even know how many millions of therapists we would need to treat not just the
Mhm.
teenagers who are struggling with mental health, but the younger kids and the adults. We have an adult mental health crisis and addiction crisis, particularly in the U.S., but mental health around the world. And we need broader based interventions that are about building resilience, and whether that's curricula in schools that integrate things like positive psychology, as the two of you do, or whether it's teaching mindfulness and self regulation skills starting in preschool, moving up through the grades, so that it's almost a public health intervention, a preventive intervention, rather than, oh my gosh, we've
Mm.
got this problem, here's the solution. To me, I also really feel strongly that that's actually a better way to teach mindfulness and positive psychology is not as, oh, you're having this problem, here's the solution, because they're much deeper actually than just here's a to the man with a hammer everything looks like a nail kind of thing. But they also have these deeper ways to explore that I think lead to growth and spiritual development and deeper personal development beyond just I'm fixing a problem. And the more we can introduce young people to those at a younger age, I think the more aware we'll, not just the less mental health issues, but the more awake and aware we'll be as a society, happier we'll be as a society, less polarized, less angry as a society, hopefully better caretakers of this planet as global citizens. And I know I'm getting a little bit kind of out there, but I really believe that if we can share this with younger people, all of this stuff at a younger age, we won't just do a lot toward the mental health crisis, but actually toward just the
The
human
world.
crisis that we're. Yeah,
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 I
right,
so appreciate your
absolutely.
response with that, because I think often what we are hearing is that the solution is this and one size fits all. And it really isn't a solution
Yeah,
that
yeah.
touches all of the things that you mentioned. And also just this idea of teaching it early on, of teaching these skills and teaching these perspectives early on, and how that can kind of transcend different stressors that come up throughout life, and make this a scalable intervention. We've talked about different ways to, address weight and address healthy eating and all of these types of things early on. This is
Mhm.
mental health really should be one of these top priorities.
Well, and I
Big
think it was
time.
in
Big
the
time.
book Healing by Thomas Insel, who used to run NIMH, and he talks about how, we do focus, to your point, Chris, too much on like number of clinicians to administer X number of hours of treatment, and really the solution to the mental health problems that we face as a country and a world really are not about the number of patient sessions, the number of clinicians. That's something about 10 or 12% of the outcomes are actually due to the treatment you administer. The vast majority are what's happening in communities, what's
Right.
happening to a person's underlying health, what's happening in terms of community violence and stress and poverty and lack, really thinking holistically.
Right.
And he talks about these 3 Ps of, purpose, place, and, I forget the last, but is basically looking at this much more kind of holistically, to look at what actually accounts for these outcomes.
Yeah.
And I just so love the idea of intervening and building healthier humans from the ground up. I can't tell you how many talks I give, Chris, that we're talking about these themes like gratitude and compassion and mindfulness and awe, and people will come up afterwards and be like, I want to go home and talk to my kid about this, or why aren't they teaching entire classes on this in schools, as opposed to waiting till a person is sick or suffering or struggling. It's a totally backwards way of thinking.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And I think, Chris, too, a lot of your work is so applicable to what's happening in schools and can be used. So many of your books can be used for teachers, for parents, and for kids. And so I think I really appreciate that about your approach and how you've connected with mindfulness and how you are moving towards teaching mindfulness, because it's ways that are digestible for people to actually understand and be able to practice these things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, certainly my hope.
Now, Chris, speaking of some of your books, we find ourselves, am I allowed to say coming out of a pandemic? Are we officially, do I have to knock on wood still?
I hope.
I think
I'm going to say it. Let's go. We're going to speak it into existence.
It'll be true.
I think it's official. Yeah.
We are out. You heard it here first, people, on this podcast, as we recorded in June. It is over. No, but as people are emerging from this unprecedented time, right, and this opportunity for reinvention and regrowth and resiliency, and a lot of this ties in, of course, to one of your recent books that I loved on how we grow through what we go through. Which, by the way, awesome title. How we grow through what we go.
Although everyone interviews me flubs it, so excellent job.
Everyone flubs my happily even after as well. They're like, happy even after, and happily even after. But anyways, that book really speaks to sort of resilience in general and growth following sort of hardship, but specifically through this lens of self-compassion. And I'm wondering if, for listeners, if you want to share a little bit about that book in general and how you see sort of this idea of self-compassion and mindfulness feeding into each other, and how we would go from there.
Yeah, and in my own journey, I have been practicing mindfulness for many years, and then kind of got more curious about self-compassion. Chris Germer has been a wonderful mentor of mine and neighbor of mine, and long before either of us had written a book, and so about 10 years into my mindfulness practice, sort of kind of working with him and doing a workshop that he was doing, and suddenly like, wow, this is like accelerant for what mindfulness can do in terms of just I think self-forgiveness, around, some stuff from the past, learning how to cultivate a more compassionate inner voice, as opposed to that, so many of us have that inner critic, right? And how do we learn how to not necessarily even get rid of that inner critic, but just turn the volume down a little bit on the inner critic and turn up the volume a little bit on the inner compassionate coach, and just be kinder to ourselves. Because I know I have always beaten myself up a lot, but it's really practicing self-compassion that I went from, calling myself all kinds of names in a harsh voice to like just kind of like letting things roll off of me, or letting the mistakes that didn't matter roll off of me, and the ones that did matter, really being able to engage and work with those, but really moving me through a lot of the shame that I felt, from some challenges when I was younger and things like that. So I really, that book came out of the pandemic, when suddenly also it went from like, I was like canceling all these trips and I'm never going to work again. And then suddenly like all these online workshops, and we talk about trauma, you talk about resilience. And and shifting, and discovering, a lot about resilience, and discovering also that more people actually experience, post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic stress. These two are actually possible to happen at the same time. Where does self-compassion, self-regulation, mindfulness fit in? And that then at first it was just a talk I was giving, like at companies and at schools and things like that. And then that became the book. Was that first, half an hour talk I slapped together that then became a 3 or 4 hour workshop I was giving places, and then wrote all that down and had the new book of how we grow through
which I can see you thinking.
It's an awesome book for listeners. And, I'm just going to repeat something you said, because I think that you threw it in there and I want to put a finer point on it. Listeners, more people experience post-traumatic growth than post-traumatic stress. And I think this is such a counterintuitive phenomenon that a lot of us, even in the field, we don't always remember, let alone look at people through that lens. Which it's kind of a mind-blowing thing, but it's emblematic of the way we've operated, I think, as a field of mental health, of this fixation on the negative, on psychopathology, on suffering, all of which certainly makes sense from a certain standpoint. But if we're not studying and learning about the people that are making meaning from life's hardest moments, who are emerging from that a better version of themselves, then we're doing both them and the world a disservice by not, soaking up all the knowledge that we can from those people and really looking at, is it something that they're doing differently that the rest of us might be able to do? But that is such, I think, an underrated piece to remember. And I'm always struck by, is it George Bonanno, who does a lot of work on post-traumatic growth, who says, when you're talking to someone, don't even use the word traumatic right away. Talk about potentially traumatic experiences. Because once you're assuming that a person responds to an event as being traumatized, you've actually lost half the battle that many people do not.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So yeah, anyways, I love your book on that. And are you working on anything else right now in terms of future books? That's it.
I've got
Only
two
two?
going in very different directions.
That's where I got the 22 from. I knew you were working on two.
One, actually, we joke about the book that I wrote with Daniel in a half an hour, 25 minutes on the phone. Here's a book I wrote in 15 minutes by text message, which my friend wrote to me, and she said, my daughter just farted, and she said, Mom, feelings are like farts, they fade away.
Insightful.
And we were both cracking up, and over text, we basically came up with 25 more fart jokes, like feelings, like they can be silent, but they're never deadly. If they ever hurt, you should probably talk to an adult you trust. They can happen in unexpected places. The list goes on and on. We write this up, send it out to publishers. We get, 6 publishers go to bidding war over it. I'm a guy that spent like 5 years writing clinical manuals, on the one hand for like 12 cents an hour. And then it's like, I write a book about farts, with my friend Tara, and how, they,
the market.
The market wants what it wants. Yeah.
Exactly. The market wants what it wants. So,
awesome.
Exactly.
And does that have a title for listeners to look at for when feelings are like farts?
Feelings are like farts. We've got enough people, which is farts are like feelings too.
I mean, I feel strange saying this, but it really resonates with me. Even the few examples that you gave, that's so true.
Right? You don't want them, if you hold them in for too long, they really end up exploding.
Yeah.
Sometimes they can be silent but deadly.
You don't want to have them in yoga class, on an elevator, on an airplane. They can make you laugh with friends, but
love it.
I can't dispute any of those.
Exactly. It's the truth. So we actually just had the illustrator meeting this morning, even though we actually wrote this book 3 years ago. It was the beginning of the pandemic. So we're super pumped about that. That'll probably be on my grave, is not, the hours of academic research I did, but it'll be like, the guy that wrote the first book. And then a book about mental health for college students, because that's really near and dear to my own heart. 20 some years after I graduated or barely graduated.
And I noticed that you were working on that, Chris. And I think it's like, it's one of those topics, sometimes you like hear about a book or learn about a topic or see a talk or a movie comes out. We're like, how has a documentary not been made on that? It seems like it would. And I was actually, when I saw you working on that, it struck me of like, there's really not much that's quite like that's out there. There's really has not been much in the way of books, at least that I'm familiar with. So it's
yeah, me neither.
There is nothing. I mean, I was doing the comps for the book proposal, and I was like, how is there not a book on mental health in college? And so it's really exciting to be able to be the first one. I really want it for RAs to have it, Psych 101 professors to assign it, parents when they get that phone call like mine did 25 years ago, that this is the book that they get that can hopefully start them on a journey. And I actually would love I'm interviewing many students. I'm interviewing clinicians. So if you're a student listening, hit me up. If you're a clinician listening, hit me up. The two of you, I would love to interview about this topic. So
Chris, my man, anything for you, you know
that. Jonah might have more fun college stories than I do, but would it be happy to? Okay, so Chris, for every episode, we like to ask the same last 4 questions, and so we call this our lightning round. So we'll make this not too painful for you. So what's one change you'd encourage listeners to make based on your work and what we've talked about today?
Practice 1 minute of mindfulness a day, and see if your day doesn't go differently. Or do one thing mindfully. Just mindfully sip your coffee in the morning, or mindfully take your shower, and see if your day doesn't
Love that.
change a little bit.
My gulping 4 cups down this morning does not count, apparently. So
before 8 a.m., right? Isn't that your rule?
That's how I do it. Chris, next one, which you actually already spoke to, but if something else comes to mind or it's one of the ones you already mentioned, feel free. But what is one thing that you're working on right now as we speak on a professional level that you're most excited about?
The next thing after this, because I'm always doing something, is really wanting to write about communication and how what's sort of the neuroscience of communication, because that hasn't really been done either. And I feel like I'm always like studying what I need to learn or writing about what I need to learn. It's like gotta learn gratitude. Gotta learn positive psychology. Gotta learn resilience. Gotta learn. I guess I gotta learn about parts, but I really need to learn how to communicate better. So
you're doing okay, but that's very good. And,
no kidding.
And on some level, we're all doing me search at the end of the day when it comes to all these topics. So
yeah,
we're in a good company.
Agreed. I just haven't, published 20 books with the me search that I've done, but we're all doing me search.
Well, you will. Let's get on it.
I need to talk to my 4-year-old about any ideas that he has. I'm hearing it. Okay, so what's one thing on a personal level that you're looking forward to right now?
That I'm looking forward to. My new plan is to try to take my summers completely off. So I'm taking 4 weeks this summer. I took 6 or 7 last summer, and next summer I want to take like a full 8 is my intention. So we'll see if I can pull that off and just be with my family, travel with my family, and truly
for you.
Sounds lovely.
What are you, a professor or something? My brother and sister-in-law are both academics, and the whole calendar in the summer is a source of envy for me. So I'm not jealous or anything, Chris. Last but not least, being that this is the happy hour, where is my margarita? But how do you, on a personal level, what are some of your go-tos when it comes to cultivating happiness and well-being in your own life? What are some of your keys there?
Exercise is important to me. Time outside is really, really important to me. Just being outside. Actually, I just saw something about this, that if you spend an hour and a half outside every day, you're happier. I BS on Facebook or something, but I gotta find that article because that's really important to me, is outside time. family time, and travel. Any combination of those I can manage. So outdoors, traveling with my family, and gratitude. I think, we do actually, as a family, we do roses and thorns at the end of every day, where we talk about 4 roses for the sort of 4-to-1, negativity bias ratio. Things that went well. Of course, my kids are like, let's do 100 roses. I don't want to go to sleep. I'm like, let's do a thorn of something that didn't go great, and then a bud of something we're looking forward to.
Love
That's
it.
that's sort of the pandemic. Tradition. We've been able to keep it up.
I know.
And I'll just point this out for listeners. I mean, I think there are, of course, times, right, where things are more complicated, right? We would be the first to admit that. If, some people, need more than this. But I think if you just imagine a world where we spent more time with people we care about, and we spent a little bit more time in the here and now with mindful awareness, if we focused on the good instead of just the bad, if we moved our body in those ways that you talked about, and we spent more time outside, those 5 things, imagine what that would do to our health, to our mental well-being, to our sense of, place in the world. So really, I think sometimes we as psychologists, the 3 of us are guilty of this. We make things almost more complicated, and we shy away from some of these basic foundational things of, like, if we spend time moving your body outside with people you care about, doing things that matter, you're going to be doing better at the end of the day. So anyways, appreciate that answer, Chris.
Yeah.
I appreciate being here, and I appreciate the work you 2 are doing. And Supriya, it's wonderful to meet you, and I look forward to staying connected with the 2 of you and hitting you up for research.
We would love that. So. And thank you for being here with us today. I feel like I learned so much, and this was such a great conversation. So Chris, if our listeners want to learn more about you and find you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, drchristopherwillard.com or at Dr. Chris Willard on, I guess, everything but TikTok because I'm too old. But at Dr. Chris Willard, I'm on like Instagram, and I don't know if I'm going to stay on Twitter or not, but Facebook, LinkedIn, I guess we'll see what comes next. But that's where you can
We'll
find
put those
me.
in the show notes as well.
Media stuff, and just Google me on the website. There's some fiction writer also named Christopher Willard, so sometimes people get us confused, but I'm the Dr.
Yeah, and I feel like there was an actor in maybe the first Scream who had a similar name to yours, but maybe I have to check that out.
So make sure it's the Dr. Christopher Willard. Yeah. That's who we're looking for.
That's right. Yeah, the name is escaping me, and I don't want to go on a tangent, but yes.
Thanks for stopping, Jonah.
I will hold myself back.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Chris, for being here.
Matthew Lillard, not even Christopher. I was way off.
I knew you can't help yourself.
Of course.
What are you going to do? Psycho killer,
This is
Chris, a random fact.
This is Chris Willard, not a murderer in a Scream movie. This is the famous speaker and writer.
Not a Canadian novelist either, who's like accountant emails me every year. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Chris. You're the best. Appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you all.
Thank you both.